Today, we are striking all over the world, not the least here in Germany and Berlin, under the hashtag uproot the system, because that's what we want to do. And it's been a really turbulent last year and a half. This has been a time where we have been reminded of how vulnerable we are. But we have also been reminded of how fast things can change and be turned completely upside down. In some parts of the world, we have experienced what it is like to truly treat an emergency like an emergency and to change social norms. But while all this has happened, of course the climate crisis hasn't disappeared, and we have not disappeared. The concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere hasn't been this high for at least 3 million years. And 2020 was tied with 2016, the hottest year ever recorded. And recently, we've seen extreme weather events rage all around the world and taking many lives, not the least here in Germany. And if there's one other thing that this pandemic has shown us, it is that the climate crisis has never once been treated like an emergency. It is clearer than ever that no political party is doing close to enough. But it's even worse than that. Not even their proposed commitments are close to being aligned with what would be needed to fulfill the Paris Agreement. As an example, if you look at the different parties' climate policies and compare that to the CO2 budgets provided by the IPCC that will keep us below 1.5 degrees, you can see that there's a huge gap. Not one party is even close to even proposing a pathway that will be consistent with the Paris Agreement. And yes, voting is essential, but alone it is not enough. If we want to ensure a safe present and future on planet Earth, we need to be active democratic citizens and go out on the streets like we are doing today. We need to become climate activists and demand real change. Because remember, change is now not only possible, it is also urgently necessary. But when enough people demand change, then change will come. On election day or any other day, and that's why we have to continue fighting for as long as it takes. The climate crisis is an accumulative crisis. The CO2 we emit now will be up in the atmosphere for up to a millennia. It is just as much about our present and future emissions as it is about our historic emissions. And that's why we need to have historic emissions in mind when we ensure climate justice. And while we're at it, Germany is the 4th biggest emitter of CO2 in history. For a nation of about 80 million people, that's quite an achievement. Germany is objectively one of the biggest climate villains. But we are not only stealing the future from our children and grandchildren, we are also stealing the present from the most affected people in the most affected areas. Those who are already suffering the consequences of the early stages of the climate and ecological crisis, and those who have contributed to this crisis the least. And now, as we move out of the pandemic, many are talking about using this as an opportunity for a green, sustainable recovery, whatever that means. And world leaders are talking about building back better, promising green investments and setting vague and distant climate targets in order to say that they are taking climate action. However, the fact that we are in a crisis that we cannot build, buy or invest our way out of seems to create some kind of collective mental short circuit among the people in power. And the longer they pretend that we can solve the climate crisis within today's system, the more invaluable time we will lose. But even if we ignore that fact, when you look at we are actually investing the money that's supposed to be building back better, it shows the hypocrisy of our leaders. It turns out that the green recovery they are talking about isn't so green after all. Only 2% of government's recovery spending has been allocated to clean energy, according to IEA. And 2021 is currently projected to experience the second highest emission rise ever. And according to a new report by the UN, the global emissions are expected to rise by 16% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels. Yes, you heard that right. Time and time again, the people in power show their true interest and priorities. And it is not an overstatement to say that they simply don't seem to give a damn about us. We can no longer leave this to the people in power to take care of. Yes, we must vote, you must vote. But remember that voting only will not be enough. We must keep going into the streets, and we must keep demanding our leaders to take real climate action. We must never give up. There's no going back now. But we can still turn this around. People are ready for change. We want change. We demand change. And we are the change.